the standard 40-foot bus. While it's the mainstay of many transit systems, not everyone needs a bus of this size. When GM and Flxible discontinued their 30-foot offerings in the mid-1970s, it left a void in the marketplace. Then, a small Canadian upstart stepped in and changed the course of North American bus history. This is the story of the Orion I, the bus that wasn't too big and wasn't too small. It was just right. Hi, this is Jeffrey. Now, not every transit system needs a full-sized 40-foot bus or a 60-foot articulated bus. Back when GM and Flxible were producing their new-look buses, they also offered a 30-foot version of their vehicles. However, it was discontinued in the mid-1970s, and that left a gap in the market. In 1976, a new small Canadian upstart, Orion Truck and Bus Industries, decided to develop their own. What they created became a very popular bus that was later expanded to 35 and 40-foot versions. It captured about 1/3 of the North American bus market when it was in production. It's a really interesting story, so let's get started in learning about the Orion I transit bus. Not every transit system needs a 40-foot bus. Both GM and Flxible did indeed build 30-foot approximate length versions of their new looks, but GM discontinued their shorter model in 1974 and Flxible followed suit in 1976. Therefore, a gap was left in the North American market for a bus that would meet the needs of smaller cities and operators. But a new Canadian upstart would step in, think small, and fill that gap. In the early 1970s, Arnold Wollschlaeger owned and operated his own company, Ontario Truck and Bus Industries. He had been building and repairing large vehicles for over 2 decades when he received a contract from the Government of Ontario to assemble and retrofit a fleet of vehicles for their experimental dial-a-bus service. The dial-a-bus vehicles were fiberglass-bodied, diesel-powered Rek-Vees, which were originally designed to be camper vans. But they proved unsuitable for tough transit conditions. The experience, however, inspired Wollschlaeger to build a heavy-duty, medium-sized bus of his own that could serve smaller-scale public transportation operations and be easy to maintain. In 1975, with a team of experienced and loyal tradespeople, Wollschlaeger began hand-building the prototype of what would eventually become their new bus, which would debut a year later. And what would this new bus be called? It was the Orion I. Their creation was 30 feet long, featured a single-sealed swing door in the front, thermal windows, and tubular construction. It had features that made maintenance simpler, including an outside electrical access panel, satin steel panels for easier repair, and large roof hatches. All Orion I buses for the Canadian market would be built in Mississauga, Ontario. Internally, OBI designated the bus model as 0.501 through 510, with the last 2 numbers denoting a combination of vehicle length and 1- or 2-door configuration. When it emerged on the scene, the Orion I bus, which began full production in 1978, offered a distinctive, almost cute image compared to the more common General Motors and Flxible new looks, and it belied its many innovations. Along with an upstart attitude to aggressively pursue forgotten corners of the bus market, it eventually helped the company to fully capture 1/3 of North American bus orders. Now, let's take a look at some of the basic specifications of the original Orion I bus. Number 1, length is 30 feet. Number 2, width is 96 inches. Number 3, height is 9 foot 6 inches. Number 4, weight is 19,250 pounds. Number 5, passenger capacity is about 30 seated, but varies due to configuration. Number 6, engine is the Detroit Diesel 6V53 at 183 to 225 horsepower. And finally, number 7, top speeds were geared for between 65 and 75 miles per hour. In 1977, the company was renamed Orion Bus Industries, or OBI. Jonathan Wallington, a manager at OBI during this time, recounts how risky the project was.
The 30-foot Orion I weighed less and would burn less fuel than a standard-sized bus. But it was a gamble. The Toronto Transit Commission, for example, had not purchased a bus shorter than 40 feet since the early 1960s. However, the OPEC oil crisis was fresh on the minds of many. So as the production models of the Orion I rolled off the assembly line in the late 1970s, public transit agencies in Ontario started to buy.
Eventually, OBI began producing larger Orion I buses, introducing a 35-foot model in 1979 and a 40-foot model in 1984. But the sales didn't come quite quickly enough. OBI was underfinanced, and it was eventually forced to sell the American and rest of the world manufacturing rights to the Greyhound Bus Line's subsidiary TMC Manufacturing. TMC renamed the Orion I the T-30 City Cruiser and was built at their factory in Roswell, New Mexico from May of 1979 until 1982. However, in 1979, Arnold Wollschlaeger passed away. Donald Sheardown, whose family was in the transportation business, bought OBI from Arnold's family and, with greater financial backing, bought back the American and world manufacturing rights for the Orion I in 1981. He then set out to expand production. The T-30s were initially produced under license before OBI incorporated the wholly owned subsidiary Bus Industries of America, or BIA, in 1981 to assemble the buses in Oriskany, New York, starting in 1982. A grand total of 2,731 Orion I and T-30 City Cruiser buses were produced in 10 transit and suburban variations, with the last one rolling off the assembly line for Pace on June 29, 1993. And even in the world of buses, smaller is sometimes better. Or at least needed. And so there it is, the story of the Orion I, the bus that stepped in when GM and Flxible walked away from the 30-foot bus market. Now, Orion built 7 different bus models throughout its lifetime. However, the company had financial difficulties and were eventually acquired by Daimler Chrysler, and they built their last bus in 2013. So have you ever ridden on an Orion I? If you did, let us know. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this look at the Orion I bus. And as always, thank you so much for watching and have a great day. Bye.